How's this for a video intro? I was thinking for a response from a viewer as I was walking back from the gym yesterday, and instead of just walking along the promenade in Vlorë back to my Airbnb, I decided to walk in the water and film it. I created a long-form video a few days ago that connected the dots to problems we all face today in regards to culture, society, economics, and government in most nations. My main points in it: we need more regulation, accountability, transparency, enforcement, and taxation of the rich and all of our institutions. But I went beyond that, explaining how we, as citizens, need to be involved and need to look at our relationships with corporations and celebrity culture. But I didn't really finish the thought that we as people need to be more cognizant of what's going on and need to think about our relationship with institutions. And one of my viewers, Cosmic4037, gave a really thoughtful and engaged response in the comments. This video is for Cosmic4037, and I really want to thank you for bringing these points up. And surprisingly, I don't disagree with the points you made. I'll add them to the description so viewers can find it. While my point is that we should rely on governments to fix the ills of culture, society, economics, and politics, I didn't elaborate on how to do it. So that's what this video is for. Namely, not only do we need more democratization of governments, but most governments, as they're formed and organized now, don't meet our needs. So we need to think about rewriting constitutions. I'm no constitutional scholar, but here are some things I see that might solve some of the problems in the world. You can certainly disagree. These are just my thoughts. But the point is, we all need to start thinking about how we can better organize our own institutions and governments better. So here's my take. Open for discussion. In this video, I'm going to talk about how we need to rethink branches of government and how they're organized. I'm going to talk about the three traditional branches of government: executive, legislative, judicial, and how they need to be changed. I personally believe in separation of powers, so keep that in mind as we move forward. First, let's talk about executive, which is probably the easiest to understand. In countries like the United States, the executive is headed by a president, a system often called a presidential system, where the executive is chosen separately from the legislative branch. In many parliamentary governments, it's the prime minister, chosen from the leader of a ruling party in a nation's legislature. They may have a president, but often that's more of a ceremonial role. Then there's nations ruled by kings or some central figure who rules as some great leader, which I reject outright, because power shouldn't be concentrated in the hands of any one person. Back to the separation of powers idea. That last point, power shouldn't be concentrated in the hands of any one person, is the most important, and most of you can agree with that. The how is where we may differ. So, what is the executive branch? Its primary purpose is to enforce, administer, and carry out the laws passed by the legislative branch. In addition to daily law enforcement, it manages the day-to-day operations of government. In my ideal world, the executive isn't ruled by one person, but by a council, or troika, where the executive has a president, a prime minister, and a third person, let's call that role a secretary or minister of state, as a placeholder. And I'll explain that role later. The troika, can't make unilateral actions without the vote of the three. In addition to the three, there's also a secretary or minister of defense, a nation's highest general, but that person doesn't get a vote on the troika. Are you with me so far? So, a president is elected separately from the legislative, the prime minister is elected by a unicameral legislature, and the secretary or minister of a state, which is chosen randomly from the whole population, who is trained to lead, educated for the sole purpose of good governance, and then elected by a board of educators based on merit and grade. That role is probably the strangest to most viewers, so let me explain. In countries like France, for example, educational opportunities are formed by merit, and how one performs in school determines what opportunities for further learning and advancement. I'm suggesting that it should be done by lottery of all the population, and several candidates should be chosen by lottery to go to special schools to learn politics, ethics, governance, virtues, and the other things that are important to a democracy, because a true people's nation is a democracy. Then, the best of the best may become candidates to become the Secretary of State or Minister of State based on performance and the board of those institutions that teach them. The idea is that anyone should become a leader, hence the lottery system, and also to France's model, that only the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the ones who truly prove their worth, should rise to the top to be candidates when there are openings for that position. So a combination of both equality and merit shouldn't be mutually exclusive. I'll explain more about what this role does later. No one leader in charge of the executive. It's done by a council, president directly elected by all citizens of a nation, no electoral college. Everyone gets one vote for the office, no matter where they live in a nation. The prime minister elected by the legislative, which we'll talk about next, and the secretary or minister of state chosen at random amongst many candidates all trained, and the best one to fill the position when there's an opening. I'm leaving out a lot of details as to when elections and decisions should be made. That's beyond the scope of this video. Let's move on to the legislative branch, which is probably going to be the strangest, the most contentious, and the most confusing argument so far. Before I begin on my recommended changes, the primary purpose of a legislative branch is to make, modify, and repeal laws as democratically elected voice of the people. In the US system, we have a bicameral legislature, which was, for all intents and purposes, created as two houses of Congress, so that the House of Representatives, which every locality has their own representative, is matched by two members for an individual state. Originally, the Senate was elected by the legislatures of the states themselves, now voted directly by the population of a state. It was always a concession. The Senate was a backstop or check on the House, because when the United States was originally devised, some states were smaller than others. But to create the nation, all states needed a voice. So even smaller states had the same amount as larger states. In my ideal system, there's only the House of Representatives, no Senate body. It's not very democratic either way. So my proposed ideal is different, very different. And these are major changes to how most nations run and organize governance. The most important point here is that the people should deliberate themselves, know what's going on, participate, have an open forum, have the time to think about what's going on, and the time to participate. That might be the most important line of the whole video. The second most important point is that all politics is local. The idea of states or provinces are contrived. What any of us sees on a regular basis is what we see out of our back door. Our own locality, our own neighborhood. That should be codified and strengthened and become part of the power-sharing arrangement. We only see the world normally through our own lens, what we see and how we see it, through our own perspective, in place. Now for the particulars, and this is where it gets different than what we're used to, and where we are likely to disagree. The most basic form of governance is the locality or neighborhood themselves. I propose that everyone has a central meeting place in their own neighborhood where they congregate, meet, socialize, eat together communally, be entertained, discuss the news and important goings-on of the day, debate and vote. Each local community of equal size not only votes directly on national issues, but elects a leader to the national legislature. What I mean by that is that each community can propose legislation for their local community or the nation in general, the former for self-governance, the latter through their own representative to a national legislature representing them. If the person at the national legislature doesn't adhere to the will of the locality, they can get kicked out at any time. There isn't a top-down approach like in most governments. It's equal. The locality and the representative are directly connected. Think of this power-sharing arrangement as a great hall where everyone in a community gets a vote. They elect a leader to represent them at the National Congress. They meet together under one roof, talk, discuss, eat together, actually have a connection to their own community. From a historical perspective, think old Anglo-Saxon lodges or Viking longhouses if they were truly equal and representative. Now, in addition to one person, one vote on a community level, you also have guilds or unions of workers who locally elect a person to cast a vote for that organization. So any person may get one or more votes, one as individual, one as voted representative for a guild. The point isn't that one community competes with another, but that everyone has a say and learns and talks with other locals together, formulates opinions, comes to consensus if there is one, and their vote becomes part of a national vote. Understand that? The third pillar, the judicial, is a combination. The primary purpose of the judicial branch is to interpret the law, apply it to individual cases, and ensure that justice is administered fairly and impartially. Those who study law are voted upon by the individual to become judges, and the judges themselves vote on the Supreme Court or court of the land that acts as the constitutional court. Only candidates, such as those who were chosen by lottery for the position of Secretary or Minister of State, or those who chose to study that course, can stand for election as judges. So yes, anyone can learn to be a Secretary or Minister of State, even if they weren't chosen for that position for the office of Secretary or Minister of State. Let's finally define the role of the office of Secretary or Minister of State in my ideal. They stand above a constitutional court and can veto or overrule decisions of a supreme or constitutional court. They also act as the sole representative of the nation outside its borders based on the will of the people and the Troika, and can be voted out of office at any time where they don't meet those needs with another candidate, as discussed earlier, taking their place. Now, you might think I've handed too much power to one person. That's a fair worry, and it's exactly what I'm against. So here's the rule. The Secretary can't act alone. To overrule the court, or to sign a treaty, or to cast the nation's vote at the global body, the Secretary needs the Troika to agree. One person speaks for the nation, but three have to sign off. No single hand decides anything. Now, maybe even more controversially, they also represent the nation at the United Nations, which should be expanded to become a body of like nations, supranational in scope, where no one nation competes or has power over another, other than by representative vote. In other words, if country A wants to do something that hurts the others, the United Nations, as a legislative body, should have the power to rescind or nullify the legislation of country A. I'm espousing a true legal, global framework, with equal representation, no Security Council, and any nation who doesn't adhere will still get a voice, but may be considered a pariah by everyone else. I won't lie. I know that some of these ideas sound revolutionary or highly questionable, but if you look at it from a reasoned, compassionate, human-centric perspective, they make sense. People see the world through their own eyes, and what they see is local. Localities should listen to each other to understand global needs across borders. Media should be subsidized to discuss the local needs and how they relate to the nation. And here's where I go furthest. I know it, and I won't pretend otherwise. I think private ownership of land and the major resources of a nation should end. Not your personal belongings. Your clothes, your tools, the things you own and use day to day. Those stay yours. But the land itself, the water, the minerals, the things no one created and everyone needs, those shouldn't be owned by anyone, because the moment they are, they get hoarded, and what is hoarded is lost. That's the whole of my distribution exchange theory in one line, and that includes the ground your home sits on. I'm not saying you lose your home, I'm saying the opposite. You can't be evicted, you can't be priced out, you can't be foreclosed on, because your home stops being something a landlord or a bank can own over you. It's yours to live in, for life, but not a chip in a market that turns shelter into someone else's profit. If the resources of a nation belong to all of us, then the floor belongs to all of us. Housing, food, education, healthcare, transportation. Not luxuries earned, but the ground you stand on to build a life. I'm not asking you to agree with me here. I'm asking you to notice it follows from everything I said before. And if you think the chain breaks, tell me where. That's the conversation I want. Resources should be shared and not squandered, and societies should be focused not only on the present, but future needs and future generations. But if you think about the problems we face in nearly every nation, the systems of governance nearly every nation has doesn't work, it's flawed, prone to error, prone to power struggles, nepotism, geared for the rich, and often not responsive to the people of a nation themselves. Whether we use the system I've described or something else, we need to start to think on systems levels and what we should do to make them better. This isn't a constitutional framework. But together with my social contract of the commons and my universal declaration on equality, human rights, and justice, it fills the gaps we need to fill for a more just, equitable, and better world. What do you think? Let me know. By the way, the full walk back is around 40 minutes. If you want to watch the full video, I'll use it for an album video that I'll post next week. I'm Scott, and this is the Renaissance Spirit. Your opinion is important and dear. Thank you for walking with me today. More to follow.